So I'd like to introduce Gareth Dunlop. Gareth is an experienced digital agency leader. He's an expert in customer experience and has founded and sold multiple agencies. He now consults on strategy and innovation. So take it away, Gareth.
Thank you very much. You're very generous, perhaps too generous. You can decide at the end if you are or not. Thank you for coming along. We're going to invest our next half hour explaining or exploring the topic of it just works, exploring how we can get software or aim higher for our software than it purely simply being functional. I want to sort of ask the question, is there a level beyond purely functional that we can aspire our software to achieve? So we're going to explore from working, being functional, to working well. I'm going to explore or ask the question, what are the additional characteristics that software might have if we might deem it not simply working, not purely functional, but actually working well, really helping users get things done quickly and easily. As per the introduction, I am indeed a long-time digital agency person. I started off life as a programmer. I kind of stumbled into the internet. I got interested in the internet. I got really interested, really curious in the interface and the relationship between technology and design and psychology and humans. And that kind of has led me into a long interest in the world of customer experience and user experience, and that's what we're going to explore in our time together. At the heart of what I want to explore is I want to think about the tension, the dichotomy almost, the contradictions that sit in and around the world of software when we think about how we as humans interact with the digital products and with the websites and with the software that we engage with as part of our regular and daily lives. And I want to start with what I think is one of the most curious straplines that I can think of. I'm sure you're familiar with it. I'm sure you know who it is attributed to. It is the strapline that Apple used in the early 2000s, inspired by Steve Jobs, when they launched a whole product range under the banner, "It just works." And I want you to imagine that you're at the marketing meeting inside Apple when you're trying to work out what phrase are we going to introduce to the market that's going to summarize how we think about product design or how we think about how we're going to build our hardware and our software. And you're getting ideas from around the table, and it gets to Steve Jobs' turn. And Steve says, "I've got it, guys. I know what we're going to say. We're going to say, it just works." And you can imagine the confused looks in the room as Steve's colleagues look at each other and go, or at least think, whether they said it out loud, I don't know, but they must at least have thought, well, what do you mean, Steve, it just works? I mean, of course it works. I mean, that's the least that people expect. Like when you buy a product of any description, your minimal expectation of that product is that it works. How can we use "it just works" as any kind of competitive advantage or any kind of differentiator? But when you look back and you think about how the range of Apple products that were launched around that time, you think of the iPod, you think of the advances in some of the shapes and the aesthetics of the products that were launched around that time, it was pretty clear that when Steve was bringing a whole body of products together under the banner, "It just works," he was thinking really deeply about something simply working intuitively and simply and in a really human way. So for me, when I think about that phrase, I think of an environment within which a lot of software, a lot of hardware hadn't even got to base camp. It was an era, I think we come from a legacy, where software was so difficult in general to use. Users were just so used to having to work really hard to get stuff to work that Steve Jobs could come along with a promise which says it just works, and that resonated with the market. So that's the first bit of tension that I observed, that somehow a statement as apparently banal as "it just works" can actually be something that really drives product innovation and differentiates in a market. The other thing that I always find really intriguing is I do quite a bit of user experience training, and I kind of keep a tally on the number of people who I've kind of met as part of that. And I've trained about 2,200 people in 15 different countries over the last 10 years, according to my little tally book. And one of the questions that I always ask them when I'm delivering the training is I ask them, have you been on a website or an app, or have you been using a piece of software in the last year that has caused you to feel angry? And always at least 50% of hands go up. And if it's a Monday morning and we're delivering the training on a Monday morning, usually I'll get 100% of hands that go up. So the hands go up. And I say to people, well, what caused you to feel angry? What you were trying to do? The most common ones that we get are timesheet systems and internal holiday booking systems. I'm not sure if that resonates with you. But I also get stuff like I was trying to get the time of the bus, or I was trying to check in for my flight, or I was trying to buy Taylor Swift tickets for my teenage daughter, or I was trying to do... And one of the things that strikes me is that when people tell me what they were trying to do, no one has ever said to me, I'm trying to unlock the nuclear codes, I'm trying to find the meaning of life. People are just trying to do regular stuff. They're just trying to get on with their day. They're just trying to get stuff done via their mobile phone or via a web browser or via a piece of software. And the thing that really strikes me is this. When people tell me what it is that has caused them to feel angry, it's not as if the company that they are on the website of is trying to trick them. Like, if you can check in for your flight online, both you and the airline benefit from that. You don't have to worry about joining a queue at the airport. The airline can manage your booking efficiently. Everybody wins if that experience is good. But yet somehow that has caused some people that I've spoken to feel angry. If the app for the local bus service is accurate and it lets you know when the bus is actually coming, everybody benefits. You benefit because you get your bus. The bus company benefit because you don't have to phone up, or you don't have to make a complaint, or you don't have to call customer service. You just know. So we're in this environment where even though there are lots of things that we can do digitally or do on software that benefits everybody, somehow the experience that has been created, the functionality is there. It's not that the functionality doesn't exist, but there's something that separates the functionality from the human. There's some friction in the middle there that has meant that rather than that person feeling empowered because they've been able to get the ticket or download the bus timetable or whatever it happens to be, rather than feeling empowered, they're feeling frustrated and angry. And I think what I'd like to explore just in our session is I just want to think about why that is, and I want to just plant some seeds about the characteristics of software that doesn't just work, but works well. And I've got 5, and I'll just go through each of them with a case study. The first one is this. Good software which doesn't just work, but works well, is user-centered. I mentioned earlier that I started off life as a computer programmer. My first job after graduation was in AIB Bank in Dublin. And I found myself in a software team that built front-end software. And at the time, our software went through 3 types of tests. It went through unit test, system test, and user test. So unit test was as you built up your modules, they went for individual testing, and they would come back with whatever errors there were. Once that was done, then you would move into how your work integrated as a whole with a wider system, and that went into functional test. And once it came out of that, it went into user test. And I remember at the time, you didn't want to get any unit test failures because that shone the spotlight very definitely on you. Your code wasn't as robust or as logical or as elegant as it should be. So unit test was taken really seriously. Similarly with functional test, when I sat down with my manager for my monthly or quarterly reviews, one of the things that we talked about, in and amongst all the other contributions that I may have made to the team, one of the things that we talked about was, how error-prone is your software? How many unit test returns are you getting? How many functional test returns are you getting? So those were taken really seriously. Now, I'm embarrassed to look back and think about the younger me and think about how user test returns were taken. They weren't taken seriously at all. The errors would come back, and we would just, I won't say we would mock the users who sent us back the feedback, but we would dismiss them. We would just think, they're stupid. They don't know as much as us. They're not as good as us. Well, of course, the user's going to make that mistake because, they're not really as bright as we are. And there was this sort of, I'm kind of embarrassed to look back at the younger me because there was this sort of dismissal of the user as an inconvenience. We're building software. We're building these rich functions, and the user somehow part of an inconvenience. And it's kind of ironic that I then went on to make my career out of the very thing that the younger me didn't quite get his hands on or didn't quite grasp. And when I look back, I'm struck by the fact that, hold on, Gareth, the software that you're designing and building and part of, who's it for? It's not for you or your programmers or your programming mates or your boss. It's for them. So if the design target, if the person for whom we're building it, if they're telling us that it's not as good as it should be, well, perhaps we should listen and take it a little bit more seriously. I think it's a challenge to really embrace that idea. And one of the reasons leads me to the largest usability test ever undertaken. The usability test was undertaken by the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It involves the world's 33 richest countries. The OECD wanted to ask the question, what is the rate of adult IT literacy in the developed world? So they went to 33 countries, and they did a usability test on about 216,000 people. And they asked them 14 questions. They asked them to fulfill 14 tasks on a computer. Each task a little bit more difficult than the task before. And the user would complete all the tasks until their first failure. And when they failed their first task, that was the test over. So some users got to level, got to question 4, and some got to question 8, some completed it all. And they did their analysis. So here's what they found. They found that 14% of users were just about IT literate. They found that about a quarter, maybe just about a third, were solid, mediocre. They could use technology. There was another quarter that they would call good with technology. And then there was a final cohort that you might call expert, level 4, really were very comfortable and confident with technology. The mathematicians amongst you will have worked out those numbers don't add up to 100, and that's because they found a staggering 25% of the adult population in the most economically developed countries in the world were deemed to be sub-level of IT literacy. Now, why am I telling you this? The reason I'm sharing this is because we face a challenge. And the challenge that we face is that all of you fine folks sitting here today are in the 5%. By dint of your personality and your interest and your qualifications and your job and what you spend most of your time doing from Monday to Friday, you just happen to be able to do lots of things with computers. You're confident and comfortable with things that lots of other people simply can't do. And the difficulty is that not only are you probably in level 4, you probably spend your whole week with colleagues who are also in level 4. And you go to conferences like today, and you meet people over coffee, and you chat to them, and they're in level 4. And so what can happen is you start to build up this picture that allows you to forget that you can do things on a computer that 95% of the population can't do. And you just assume, and it's so easy to do, that the comfort and confidence that you have with getting things done applies to everybody. And as the OECD suggestion, or the OECD research tells us, that's simply not the case. So the first characteristic of software that doesn't just work but works well is that it's user-centered. The second characteristic of good software that is not just working but working well is that it is intuitive. The software aspires to being more than simply functional. Getting it to function is the starting point. Pursuing it functioning well is where you want to get to. So let me show you some interfaces that pass function test. Some interfaces that come out of system test with a clean bill of health. So here's some examples of public interfaces that you might have encountered even today in trying to park up your car, although you probably used an app, let's be honest. But just look at how impenetrable this is. Look at how intimidating these are. It's not because they don't have the functionality to allow you to pay for your car parking. It's because no one has thought about moving from working to working well. And you see all these new signs and these sort of over-instructions and just this noise that you throw at the user. In the middle of all of that, the user just wants to get a ticket to park their car to avoid getting clamped. So it's this kind of unhuman interface, unintuitive interface that we're trying to get ourselves past when we think about being intuitive. Some of the interfaces are so bad, as you can see behind me, that they actually need fold-down instructions simply to be able to use the system. And when you think about parking your car and buying a ticket, it's not as if there's that many moving parts. You simply have to put in enough money to cover the time you want to be there, get yourself a ticket, and put it on the car. But because the focus was on working and not on working well, because we thought about does it do its job and not is it intuitive, we end up with this kind of madness here. And the result of this kind of madness is that you have long queues and you've got a situation where the users who have to use this simply haven't been considered. But when you apply a layer of intuition, or when you think about the role that intuition can play in that, what that then allows you to do is it allows you to create interfaces by which the thing the user can do, or the thing which is an offer, is just obvious, it's self-evident. So if you go to booking.com as an example, you can be under no other impression than that you're there to book holidays or to book hotels and book rooms. If you go to Google, even though it's an incredible repository of information, it's impossible not to know what you should do next. You type in your keyword and you use the search. If you use Rome to Rio, even though it's this enormous aggregation engine, you arrive on the homepage. Thought and effort has been put into making that intuitive. So the second characteristic of software that doesn't just work but works well, is that it is intuitive. Number 3, it is forgiving. Software which doesn't just work but works well is forgiving. One of my favorite kind of stories of forgiveness, if you like, comes from Disneyland and Disney World. So in the States, obviously, there's Disneyland in Florida, and there's Disney World in California. So let me just show you. Actually, they're a long way away. The shortest they are in time away from each other is about 9 to 10 hours. The quickest you can move between the two is 9 to 10 hours. It may not surprise you to learn that in the States, both Disneyland and Disney World, every night of the year, keep beds reserved away from everybody else for people who've gone to the wrong one. So people who've booked Disney World and gone to Disneyland and vice versa. And it's so common, it's so regular an occurrence that they keep beds in reserve. So rather than saying to disappointed families, you got to hop on a plane for 10 hours, they say, actually, we've got a bed just for people who are in exactly your predicament. Now, it's interesting because it's a classic customer experience challenge. If you've ever done customer experience or you've been through kind of customer experience in university, it's one of those projects that's often given. How could they improve this? And if you look at the numbers of travel for whom it's happening, that number is going down year on year. But it remains an issue. And Disney have worked hard to try and be forgiving about the fact that happens. So when we talk about software, forgiveness means 2 things. Forgiveness means, number 1, that we explore how we can help a user avoid an error in the first place. And number 2, we make it easy for users to reverse out if and when they've made an error. And again, there's loads of really high-profile examples of what happens when software isn't forgiving. Probably the one that I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of is Citibank and Revlon. Revlon have an enormous credit facility with Citibank. There had been negotiations and renegotiations about the rate at which that money was going to get paid back. Citi were planning to send some money in Revlon's direction. They wanted to return 7.8 million interest repayment, and by mistake, they returned the full 500 million repayment. Why? They did it because of a software error. Let me show you the interface that was used, that human beings, non-IT people were trying to use in order to transfer the right amount of money. This was the interface that they were using. So if you have a look, it's impenetrable. It's got no prioritization. It's got lots of labeling that you would really need to be very confident about in terms of what you're going to do with it. And inevitably, as a result of it, the folks at Citi made a big mistake. I'm not sure if you've seen in the news, this is from a couple of years ago. Last year, Citi did exactly the same thing in another part of their business, and the one from last year, the number that I read was $900 million was what it cost them. So it really pays for software to be forgiving. And the reason that it pays for software to be forgiving is because humans make mistakes. And we're busy and we're stressed and we're distracted and there's 100 other things going on. And with a little bit of thought, a little bit of softness built into the software, you can help users avoid stuff like that. And this is the press release, the 500 million accidental repayment. So what does forgiveness look like? For me, this is a lovely example of forgiveness behind me. So if you go onto MailChimp and you want to send a load of emails on MailChimp and you build up your emails and you identify the list that you want to send it to and you get everything right and you press send, they don't send straight away. MailChimp gives you this message here. It says you're about to send a campaign to your adoring followers and email subscribers. There's 982 of them. Are we good to go? And all MailChimp is doing is it's just pausing you. It's just saying, are you sure? Is this right? Is this the right list? Have you done your spell checks? Yes? Okay. Let's go. So a little bit of forgiveness just helps a distracted human trying to use the software pause for thought and get it right. Let's move on to a subject that I think is going to be close to all of our hearts, the subject of ortho. And there's at least 3 of them in town. I really like their pizzas. I like going. I'm inevitably the oldest person there, but I kind of pretend I'm there to pick up my daughter or something because it's full of young people who are trendier than me. But when you go onto the ortho website, and you want to book a table, this is the homepage. So you click into locations. And when you click into locations, it shows you, at the time I took the screenshot, there were 3. I think there's maybe a 4th now, but there's certainly 3. There's lovely little indications. There's lovely little illustrations of the front of each of the various buildings. And in this particular instance, on this particular day, I wanted to book the table for Talbot Street. So I clicked the Talbot Street one, and I pressed the book just here. I pressed that button there, the book button, and what it showed me was this. Just hold on. Are you sure? What Ordo was basically saying is, we don't want a Disney World, Disneyland situation on our hands here. We want to make sure you've come to the right place. And it's just a simple, almost fun, straightforward, common language, unobtrusive way in which you're just saying to the user, we've got three locations. We just want to make sure you're booking the correct one. And on this occasion, I was booking the correct one, so I pressed this button here, and it took me through to the booking form, and I was able to book and go and have my pizza and have a good time. So good software explores forgiveness. It recognizes that users make mistakes, and it asks, how can we anticipate those mistakes and avoid them in the first place? And if they are made, how can we help the user retrieve or restore the thing that they did wrong? Okay, next up, good software builds motorways. Now, this might sound like a curious thing, but good software thinks about the big user journeys. It thinks about the big customer journeys that most users want to take. It's constantly asking the question, what is it that most users want to do most times? Here's one of my favorite examples of where motorway building really helps users. This is the old Irish Rail website. So they redid it maybe 2.5 years ago, just coming into the start of COVID, actually. So that's maybe a little bit longer than that. But this is the old site. And as you can see here, this is the payment flow, and this is the final page of the payment flow. And from a functional perspective, this page has got two jobs. Job number one is to work out how the user is going to pay. And job number two is to work out how the user is going to get their tickets. So functionally, those are the two things that it has to do. So let's have a look and think about, can we take this kind of motorway idea and can we apply it to the interface to make things easier for users, to move from working to working well? Let's take the first question. Do you think that users are going to want to pay by credit card, debit card, or do you think they're going to want to pay by PayPal coming soon? Which of those two options do you think it's most likely that the user will want to choose? Well, of course, PayPal doesn't exist yet. It's only in the future. It's a figment of someone's imagination. So, of course, the user is going to pay by credit card or debit card. So don't show the user this false choice. And if you want to promote PayPal coming soon, I think that's legitimate. But don't do it in the form of a false question. Just do it in a simple statement. So the statement might say, Irish Rail accepts payment by credit card and debit card. PayPal payments will be available from December 2025. So replace the false question that slows all the users down as they have to think through it. Just replace it with a statement. But what about the second function? And how does this apply to motorways? The second function is, what's the delivery method? Well, you can see obviously that the delivery method is collection because it's the only radio button we have. So I'm guessing there was probably a postage option that has been removed. So we're going to be collecting our tickets. And it asks us to select our station. Now, as you can see, we are at step 4. And by the time the user has got to step 4, as you can see, the system knows where the user is going from, where they're going to, when they're going. All those things are already known. So when the system asks me to select the station, what station might I possibly want to collect my tickets from? Almost 100% of the time, I'm going to expect and want to collect it at Dublin Houston. So at the very least, the system could default me to Dublin Houston. I think there's about 130 railway stations in Ireland. I think Dublin Houston is maybe 40 or 45 on the list. I have to scroll all the way down. At the very least, it could default me. That's a start. But there's more the system could do. The system could work a little bit harder even than defaulting that. Because the thing is, there are a number of reasons, legitimate reasons, why some users may wish to collect their tickets somewhere other than Dublin Houston. Say, for example, they live in a suburb of Dublin and they've maybe got a light rail station or they've got a DART station and they're thinking to themselves, Dublin Houston is a really busy station, so when I'm getting my light rail ticket, I'll also get my main ticket from Dublin to Cork. So it's quite quiet in my local Lewis stop or my local DART station, so I'll sort all my tickets there, and then when I head into town to get the main train, I've got my tickets in my pocket, I can just hop on the train, I don't have to worry or think about it. So there's a legitimate reason why some users would want to collect their tickets somewhere other than Dublin Houston. So how do we apply this motorway thinking? Well, the motorway thinking says we've got to make sure that we build a motorway for the vast majority of users who want and expect to get their tickets at Dublin Houston, but at the same time accommodate this subset of users who might want to get their tickets somewhere else. In other words, you've got your classic use case, edge case challenge. And user experience says you don't slow down your use cases in order to accommodate your edge cases. So what does that mean for this? It means that we do the following. We update the interface to say the following. Your tickets will be available at Dublin Houston from 8 a.m. on your day of travel. And you give the user an option to say, I wish to collect my tickets at a different station. So what you're doing is you're building a motorway for your majority of users. You're not slowing them down. You're just letting them flow straight on through with the least possible thought. Now you might say, hold on, Gareth, that's not fair. Because what that means is you're letting these users just flow on through, but you're slowing down those users over there. That doesn't seem fair to me. And I would agree with you. It's not fair. But here's your alternative. Your alternative is that you slow down all the traffic to ask them this question. Or you can set up a situation where the vast majority of your traffic just flows, your users just flow through and effortlessly and relatively straightforwardly, and you force your other users to go onto the B road, choose what they want to do, and then rejoin the motorway when they're done. So software which works well and doesn't just work is software that takes its use cases really seriously. It builds motorways and it doesn't slow them down to appease edge case needs. It demotes edge cases off the main flow. And the final one that'll finish up with, folks, is that software which works well and doesn't just work is really fixated on solving problems. And I'll share a kind of case study with you that kind of illustrates this, I hope. Back when I was running the user experience agency, it was called Fathom. I led it for 10 years. We got one of those briefs through the door that you dream of. When you work in user experience, it's one of those kind of dream briefs where a leading Irish bank, AIB, I was returning to my old hunting ground from 20 years earlier. AIB asked us if we would help them design the best mortgage application process anywhere in the Irish banking system. So it was a brief that we were only too delighted to respond to, and gladly we won the work. So we got the work. Mortgage holders were split into 6 different groups: first-time buyers, people who just moved houses, buy-to-let, etc. But there was a particular focus on the first-time buyers because the bank took the view that the business case was if you get them in for first-time buying, well then they'll stick with, and you look after them, they'll stick with you for life. So far so good. And we started our research. We spoke to users. We looked at analytics. We did usability testing. We ran focus groups. We did interviews. Loads and loads of engagements with users. And as our research was coming towards the end and we were beginning to think about how we were going to express this visually on the interface, a direction of travel started to emerge that looks a bit like this. And I'm sure you're familiar with this. I'm sure you've seen TV adverts. I'm sure you've seen billboards with this sort of overly optimistic, slightly overbright advert of a young family moving into a new home. And this sort of style we see it everywhere. It's pervasive. And there was a little bit of pressure to move in that direction as we thought about the visual output of the work that we were going to do, the interfaces that we were creating. But the difficulty was this had nothing to do with anything that we had learned when we spoke to the users during the research phase. I remember in particular, there was a young couple that we spoke to who were trying to buy a house in Dublin. And they told us through tears about what their weekends looked like, because most Saturdays, one of them would go to an auction over here, the other one would go to an auction over there. They would blind bid on a house. They would both return empty-handed, and this was putting real pressure on them and their relationship and so on. So we knew this was not the right visual route to go in. And so because we were really confident about the problems that the system had to solve, we were able to move away from that visual process, and we were able to take a much more problem-solving, user-centered approach to how we set up those designs and those flows. So we were able to set up a process, a navigation structure that mirrored how you go about applying for a mortgage. We were able to set up our content in such a way that it was solving all the problems that we knew users had when they come on to do that. So software that works well and doesn't just work, doesn't just have an intuitive interface or a forgiving interface, it also really takes seriously the problems that it needs to solve. This was that on desktop, that's it on mobile, and this is it on mortgage contact information. So just to wrap up, folks, thank you for your time and attention. Let me just leave you with the 5 takeaways. The characteristics of software that we could describe as not simply working, but actually working well is number 1, it's user-centered. Everybody on the project team knows that the people that you're doing the work for isn't you or your boss or your colleagues, it's for the users over there. Number 2, it's intuitive. It's self-evident how it works. It does the thing that users think it does. It doesn't hide it. It doesn't obfuscate it. It doesn't need large instruction manuals. It just does the thing. Number 3, it's forgiving. It helps users avoid mistakes in the first place. And for users who do make mistakes, it helps them rewind and get on the right track. Number 4, it builds motorways. It is obsessed on use cases. It intuitively demotes edge cases. It doesn't slow down all the traffic to appease your edge case users. And 5th and finally, it solves problems. The project team, the designers, the interface people, the software people, everybody who's involved in that project is constantly thinking about who are the users, what are the problems they have when they come to this interface, and how can we make sure that we solve their problems as they access our functionality. So that's it, folks. Thanks very much for listening, and I hope I've given you some good clues as to how your software won't just work, but work well. Thank you.
Advice there. There we go. Do we have time for one little question? Anyone? Oh.
Great. Pardon me, great talk. I just missed the start of it, so apologies if you've already covered this. But what's your experience with user testing been like? And, do you want to just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, yes, I will. I'll say a little. Usability testing is the go-to research method for human-centered software design. It's your absolute go-to. There are lots of research methods that we have available to us: qualitative and quantitative, attitudinal and observational. We've got, I'd say we've got at least 20 techniques, but the absolute go-to is usability testing, because the power of it is that you're seeing actual users, actual humans, trying to engage with and interact with the product that you've built. One of my favorite examples of it is in places like Google. If you've created an interface, or you've created a prototype or a flow, inside Google they call it a design hypothesis until it has been in the hands of a user. So you can only call it a design after a user has interacted with it and you have improved it and optimized it as a result of that user engagement. So I think the big power of it is that it takes your design from being a best guess, like the best you can do about what you think users will like, and it allows you to validate that and be confident that it's actually what users want, because you've seen users use it. So I think it's a very powerful tool.
Brilliant. Thank you. A design hypothesis. How wonderful is that? All right. Can we give it up for Gareth, please?
Thank you.